Morning, everyone. I'm Tori Brown, and as Executive Director of Molly's Fund Fighting Lupus, I welcome you to our symposium today on men, women, love, and lupus. We're very honored to have with us an internationally recognized expert on these topics, Dr. Robert Lahita. Dr. Lahita has many titles. He is the Chairman, Vice President, and a Senior Attending Physician at Newark Beth Israel Medical Center in New Jersey. He is also a Master of American College of Rheumatology, and on the faculty of both the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey and Mount Sinai School of Medicine. Dr. Lahita is also a prolific author, 14 books, one pending. And his books include the bestseller, Lupus Q&A, Everything You Need to Know. This book is an invaluable resource to those living with lupus, their family, lupus advocates, and other medical professionals. Clearly, Dr. Lahita is a busy guy, and we are thrilled that he's willing to share his expertise and answer questions for us this morning. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Lahita.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here in beautiful Portland. The weather is gorgeous, and coming from the East Coast, we're not used to such hot weather. We never hit 100 in New York City. We get to 80, and it's really hot. And we're currently in the 85 to 90 range. Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad that we have some of the third edition of Lupus Q&A. And if you look at that book, you'll notice that Barbara Bush wrote the foreword. Barbara is Bush 41's wife, and it was because Millie, the dog, believe it or not, and that's a whole story which we could go into informally, Millie had lupus. Nevertheless, I was asked to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's lupus in men. And lupus in men get a raw deal with this disease, and I've always felt that way because there are many, many men with the disease. I see hundreds in my practice. I also see hundreds in our clinic, and particularly the African American men and the Asian, the Filipino and Chinese and Thai men, where lupus in the Orient is actually more common than rheumatoid arthritis. So autoimmunity is very, very powerful, very prominent, very important as a group of illnesses. And it's an area that we have been very, very interested in with regard to our basic research and our clinical research. Now, in this particular slide talk, there's a lot of science, but I'm not going to go into the science at all, so I'm going to cut it off after I show you the differences between men and women with regard to lupus and give you some idea that men have given us really clues about the cause of the disease. The first slide is that there is a low male incidence after puberty, and that's to be expected, approximately 1 male for every 10 females after puberty. That doesn't mean that men don't get the disease. It means that there's a lot of men out there because there are millions of women with the disease. So there are a lot of men that have lupus in varying forms. There are low androgens or male hormones, androgens or male hormones, in patients with lupus, particularly females. Now, men have testicles that make copious amounts of androgen, and androgen is very protective as far as humoral immunity goes. Women have low plasma androgens, and this is an old paper I wrote in 1983 where there's an increased oxidation of testosterone in women. And you know, testosterone is used by women to increase libido. And women have very low levels of testosterone or androgen. Men have huge amounts of androgen, but not all men. The differences in the disease between men and women, you can see from varying studies, and these are older studies, but nevertheless they hold up because nobody looks at this anymore. Pleurisy is more common in men, renal disease, particularly in African American males, renal failure, seizures, discoid lupus, etc. When compared, more common in women are neurological, hair loss you see a lot of in women, thrombocytopenia, the malar rash, and Sjögren's syndrome symptoms. Michelle, my buddy from Johns Hopkins, she found autoimmune hemolytic anemia and lupus anticoagulants in men more than she saw Sjögren's symptoms or dry eyes, dry mouth, dry mucous membranes more common to women. So this is a Klinefelter, and this is a very important group of men. These are men with an extra X chromosome. And right now, because we talk about, and I'm going to talk about in a minute, epigenetics, this guy who's about 55 went on and on and on, was diagnosed with lupus very late in life. Point out that on his extensor surfaces of his arm, you can see lumps. Those are rheumatoid nodules. He was thought to have rheumatoid arthritis, but in fact had systemic lupus erythematosus. And he is a Klinefelter patient. The ambiguous genitalia, the vasculitic lesions on his legs, he had adopted children. This is not a rare condition, but it's not common, and the men that have this condition tend to have, or are more prone to getting diseases like lupus, scleroderma, and rheumatoid arthritis. Now, the reason for that is the XXY. Yeah, good. So this is one thing that predisposed men to lupus, and this is hyperprolactinemia. Now, I throw this in because this is an extra. Hyperprolactinemia in women is also associated with a lupus syndrome. It's not as common as hyperprolactinemia in patients who have just delivered a baby, for example, and are excreting milk from the mammary glands, the breasts. The prolactin levels postpartum, after delivery, go up, and milk is produced and the baby is suckled. Hyperprolactinemia can occur from a small tumor of the pituitary gland, either a micro or macro adenoma. In some of the men we have seen, we have actually seen males, there are two of them right here, who have presented with exhaustion, depigmentation, joint pains, poor sex drive, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune attack on the thyroid gland. And again, here's a second male with poor libido, arthralgias, that's joint pain, pulmonary disease, kidney failure, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Incidentally, Hashimoto's thyroiditis for both men and women is probably the single clue that suggests that there's an autoimmune process going on. I rarely see Hashimoto's in men, so this was unusual. I only see Hashimoto's in women as a rule. Hashimoto's, low thyroid function. In rare cases, high thyroid function. Hashitoxicosis, I call that. But Hashimoto's thyroiditis usually results in low functioning thyroid, weight gain, despite the fact that they're on diets, etc., etc. Ladies in the audience know what I mean. You can eat veggies from now till the cows come home and still gain weight. It's associated with Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So these two men were classic examples of what we call hyperprolactinemia. And this was one of the men who was a lawyer, and you may be able to see, there's the pituitary. I know you're not doctors or radiologists, but there's a tumor there that was a macroadenoma, and it resulted in his lupus symptoms. I'm not going to bore you with data, but to say that here I intervened and I caused his prolactin levels to drop and his platelet levels to come back. He presented with low platelets, bruising, bleeding, etc. This was one example of lupus in a male. In about a third of our men, the testosterone and androgen levels were low, dropped. And for some reason, the testosterone or male hormones really protected the men from getting lupus erythematosus. So we think of male hormone as a protective substance for the immune system. But here we have the men with the extra X chromosome, the Klinefelter XXY. Men are XYs, women are XXs. The feeling now, there is an area called epigenetics, which means literally outside of genes. The epigenetics area is the de-repression of certain genes on the X chromosome that is thought to predispose you to getting autoimmune diseases like lupus. So the epigenetics of the X chromosome. So the boy gets one X from his mother and a Y from dad. That one X chromosome can have the predisposing gene for lupus. A guy who gets two X's, as the Klinefelter that I showed you, has a much higher chance of having one of those lupus X-related genes. The gene itself is not changed. However, the expression of the gene is changed, and that's what we think causes autoimmunity. So where do the hormones come in? The male hormones and the female hormones. Well, the female hormones accelerate the activity of the immune system, and the male hormones tamp them down. Now, if you have a male, as I have many men, who have had injuries to their testes, they've had mumps as a child, they have other reasons for what we call hypogonadism, which means their testes don't function properly, they will be predisposed to getting a disease like lupus. So that is where the X chromosome comes in, and the hormones sort of rev it up. But the hormones don't cause lupus. Estrogens don't cause lupus. Estrogens will make your lupus worse, and it will, of course, enhance clotting if you happen to be one of those people with the clotting abnormalities, or sticky blood, as I call it. I'll tell you that the prolactin from the pituitary that causes the specific kind of lupus also increases in estrogen. So these guys will have erectile dysfunction. That is, they will not be able to get an erection. And that's not uncommon. There are several reasons for erectile dysfunction, one of which is hormonal, another is physiological, another is psychological. Because if one has a chronic illness with a lot of joint pain, as we'll talk about in quality of life, the second talk that I'm going to talk about, you would begin to see why men would have erectile dysfunction. I see a lot of men that I actually put on male hormones. Not that it does anything to the immune system. We've tried that. We've had men on DHEA and other kinds of male hormones in an attempt to reverse the lupus problem. Here we have the conversion of hormones. I mean, this is a complicated slide, but suffice it to say that all of us have testosterone, and this testosterone can become another androgen, which is very potent as a behavioral hormone, but it can also be aromatized, we call that, to estrogens in both men and women. So women have testosterone, men have testosterone. Men have a lot more, like almost 100-fold more testosterone than women. But this testosterone can disappear through oxidation in both men and women. Here you see the oxidation, and I show this because here I only showed females as having an increase in the loss of testosterone. If we ever measure testosterone in a woman with active lupus, it's non-existent. You measure testosterone in a normal woman that does not have lupus, you see, as you see here, the normal female has low oxidation and normal levels of testosterone, and here's normal men and women. The last slide, without getting into really complicated data, that as men age, this is an androgen here and testosterone here. You see the testosterone levels go down from 21, between 25 and 34, down here to 13, and I believe this is milligrams per deciliter. And his androstenedione, which is another potent androgen, decreases with age. And DHEA is a very special compound, and you can see that decreases with age. Now, how many people here in the audience are on DHEA, either men or women? You are? You are? Yeah, it's common to take DHEA. It's thought to be the anti-aging hormone. The problem is that in the health food stores, it's available at 25 milligram pills. When we did the lupus study, which turned out not to be successful, only because we didn't know how to measure lupus activity properly, the DHEA was given 200 milligrams per day. So that 200 milligrams per day has to be made up by the compounding pharmacy and prescribed by your doctor with a special prescription. You go to the compounding pharmacy and he makes up the DHEA. This is the most common hormone in men and women. This DHEA sulfate in the brain is in milligram concentrations. If I were to take your brain and dissolve it in ether, I could get out milligram concentrations of the sulfated hormone, dehydroepiandrosterone. I show this only because I want you to know that in men, as these levels decrease, or if something happens in here where the testes stop functioning or the pituitary has an adenoma which enhances estrogen metabolism, you can develop lupus as a male. Men already feel that, wow, this disease, it's always stressed that this is a woman's illness. This is not a woman's illness. It just happens to occur in women more frequently because they have more X chromosomes. All right? So this is an illness that does affect men as well. The lower the androgens go, the more likelihood you're going to have autoimmune disease. You can have autoimmune disease and have normal androgens, so we don't understand where or why men get lupus in general, because not every man that shows up in my clinic has low androgens. We found that epigenetics, or the change in expression of genes, which has only been the last 5 years, is really, really important. It's the effects of environment, hormones, and chemicals, diet, medicines on the expression of genes. That's how we think autoimmunity happens. Let me give you an example. Crocus bulbs or tulip bulbs are planted in your lawn. All right? When the light cycle becomes greater and the temperature gets warmer in the spring, those bulbs sprout. Essentially, there's no change in the genes, except that in the winter, those genes are dormant. There's no expression. But temperature has a regulatory effect on the expression of genes and allow the flower to sprout and become a crocus or a tulip. That's epigenetic. We haven't changed the genes. We've simply changed the expression of the gene and allowed the expression to change. So acetylation, methylation, situation, all of these chemical effects, if there's any chemists in the audience, they would understand this. They have a role on the gene itself to allow expression or non-expression at certain times in your life. Now, we know we've studied identical twins. We've looked at twins with lupus, for example. We know that the congruency, that means both twins getting the disease at the same time, is about 30%, which is not terrific. But it indicates that that X chromosome is probably there in both twins, and the expression of the X chromosome may occur in one twin, or it can occur in both twins, depending on what the environment is all about. So that's very, very important. It's a whole new way of looking at autoimmunity and lupus. And in men's diseases, since the man only has one X chromosome, but a woman has two, the epigenetics of expression of that one X chromosome is going to be the root of the lupus. So some of the hormonal things that are quite interesting, before I leave the male lupus thing and I'll open it up to questions, are when a woman gets pregnant, her lupus goes either hog wild or goes away or stays the same. When a woman has rheumatoid arthritis, generally the rheumatoid arthritis goes away until she delivers, and it comes back with a vengeance. Nobody understands why. You know Raynaud's, where you have red, white, and blue fingers and toes. Many of you have that. That goes away when you become pregnant. The Raynaud's generally goes away, then it comes back after delivery. So we think there's something in the epigenetics of that, perhaps hormonal regulation of the way the blood vessels constrict and how they expand and dilate with hormonal changes. Same thing happens in men. And men can experience the same kind of changes, but they don't have the tremendous estrogen flood that a woman who's pregnant has. So the men tend not to have changes that are that dramatic with their disease. So the next question you might have is, well, the guys that I put on androgens or testosterone patches or gels or whatever, do they improve? The answer is no. I don't see any difference. What does improve is their behavior. Their sex drive goes up. Their ability to experience sexual pleasure increases. Does it have any effect on their disease? No. Does it lower the antibodies? No. So in essence, we have found that use of DHEA or testosterone in men with this disease does not change the course of the disease. And now it makes more sense, because in those days we didn't know anything about epigenetics. But if we think that this is a genetic expression on the X chromosome, then it wouldn't make a difference.